Our whole solar system is a vast ruin of an ancient technological civilization that existed literally millions of years ago.
Wow.
And all kinds of things could have happened in those million years. You can imagine they had wars, and they had the beginning of civilizations, and they had their height of their civilization, and then the civilization declines. All kinds of things has gone on in our solar system. And our solar system is continuing to be the home for all kinds of non-human intelligent life forms. They live in gigantic, you could call them motherships, gigantic cigar-shaped objects that orbit the rings of Saturn. And these have been photographed by NASA. A lot is going on.
Aloha and welcome to another show, guys. I'd like to welcome back my special guest today, Sesh Heri. The last time Sesh was here, we explored ley lines, hidden energy forces, and the mysteries surrounding places like Disneyland's parks, Florida's energy points, and Hawaii's Halona blowhole. But there is so much more to unpack. So he's back today. And in today's conversation, we are taking things even further, diving deeper. And today we're going to be talking about ley lines and their deeper purposes, Nikola Tesla's work, the Philadelphia experiment, and so much more. And Sesh is recorded through my phone, so he will be in audio only. And I apologize for the sound quality, but the conversation is absolutely worth it, guys, so stick around. Before we jump in, I just want to thank two amazing people who have supported me on Patreon. I actually just removed the paid tier because I feel the information I want to give out to people is too important to be put behind a paid wall. So I want everyone to have access to the videos. However, I noticed that Patreon is still showing a membership option. I was trying to remove it, and I actually had it for $10, thinking that no one would purchase my Patreon membership. And to my pleasant surprise, someone signed up over the weekend, and I was so ecstatic. But I want to keep to my true message, and I don't want to charge people. So if you visit Patreon, please be sure you select the free membership section instead. Do not go to the paid membership option. I've been refunding monies back for anyone who has signed up because I don't want to charge for this. That said, I want to give a huge thank you to Steph, my very first Patreon supporter. She went above and beyond because even though I canceled her and refunded her money, she went above and beyond and she bought me 10 cups of coffee. Stephanie, I can't even tell you how much I appreciated that and how much you made my day. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. I totally was not expecting that. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And Bay, you also signed up for the paid Patreon membership, and I refunded your money as well. And I don't know if when I did that, it may have kicked you out completely. So please come back and sign up again under the free section. I also emailed you, Bay, so I hope you got my message, but I'm not sure if you did. So, well, guys, one more thing I got to say before we jump in is that I want to remind you that if you haven't already done so, please be sure to follow and subscribe to the show. It's the best way to stay updated on new episodes, and it really helps us to continue bringing on fascinating guests like Sesh. If you've enjoyed these conversations, please take a moment to leave a positive review. It helps more people to discover the show, and it supports independent content creators like myself, and it helps to grow our little ohana. So thank you again, guys. Also, if you'd like to support the show in a way that costs you nothing extra, check out my website, sensiblehippie.com. Under Where I Shop and Books I Read section, you'll find links to products and books I personally recommend. If you decide to purchase through those links, I earn a small commission at no extra cost to you. It's an easy way to support the show while getting something valuable for yourself. And if you ever feel like buying me a coffee like Steph did, it's always appreciated. So, guys, enough of that. Without further ado, let's welcome our guest, Sesh Heri, back to the show. Well, aloha and welcome back to the show, Sesh. I'm really excited to have you on again because the last time we explored the fascinating world of ley lines from Disney parks to Florida and even Hawaii, and I think most notably was the Hawaii's Halona blowhole. So you also shared insights into your geomorphology and gravitational anomalies, and revealing how these forces basically shape the landscape of our lands here. So today I want to continue that conversation by diving deeper into your book, Handprint of Atlas, but I also want to discuss your newer book that you kind of recently put back out, The Wonder of the Worlds. I'd like to touch on that as well if we have time.
Sounds great.
Awesome. A lot of researchers speculate that ley lines and energy hotspots may not only affect landscape, but also be linked to UFO sightings, missing time, and strange electromagnetic effects. Have you come across that in your research doing this?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. All of that, all of the above. And in fact, in the Handprint of Atlas, I have a lot of material in there suggesting how the phenomenon of UFOs can be objectively tied to ley lines. There's a way that can be done if scientists would get together and do it, and it involves statistics, but it's a problem of getting people and the money, the financing for the project. But that was my whole idea originally in writing the book, was to try to get some people interested into investigating some of these things.
Wow, that's incredible. I think there's also reports of people experiencing time slips near powerful ley lines.
Yes, this does happen. Time slips and teleportation that I'm more aware of. But all of these things happen because a ley line is a very complicated entity. There's many aspects to it. But, a lot of people talk about ley lines, and some of these researchers, they put forth theories that are earth grids. And my problem with those theories is that they're very arbitrary, and they're not based on anything tangible or scientific. So there's a charge there that the researchers are just making things up. But my theory of ley lines is entirely based on geomorphology, the shape of the land. The shape of the land will tell you where the ley lines are. And then you can go back and you can see how people have actually built on these stress lines in the earth, and they've actually used these in various ways. And they've done it for thousands of years, not only throughout our history, but going way back, 20,000 years. There you can find evidence that someone, whether it's humans or non-humans, have built on these lines.
Wow. Yeah, we talked about that before with the hospitals, psychiatric hospitals, schools, government buildings, things like that.
Yes. And this evinces that someone today in our contemporary world has a great deal of knowledge about ley lines, and they use them with extreme precision. So, yes, hospitals, you say, why would a hospital be built on a ley line? Because there are life energies flowing through these ley lines that can be tapped into, and used in the proper way, it can vitalize the human being. So, for example, the healing processes of the human body are accelerated on ley lines. So this is why they're building hospitals on ley lines. Also, this gets very esoteric. Humans are born in hospitals today, right? So you have to think of this as a site of where the human consciousness incarnates into the physical form. And the ley line facilitates that, because the soul is coming from another dimension, and it's entering into this space-time dimension, and these ley lines are window areas between the two dimensions. Another aspect to this is what I found was fish hatcheries. It's the same thing. The reason they put these fish hatcheries on ley lines is that that's where all the vital energy is at, and they're taking advantage of that.
Oh, that's quite interesting. When I was looking into a lot of the places that you were talking about with these ley lines, I noticed that there's a lot of legends here in Hawaii I can speak of about night marchers. In Hawaiian mythology, night marchers, huakai po, are the spirit warriors of ancient Hawaii. These spectral processions, often seen carrying torches, are said to march along coastlines and ridges, escorting sacred kings, chiefs, or chiefess. Legend warns that those who look upon them may face dire consequences, as they are believed to be powerful guardians of ancient traditions and sacred pathways. Places that I looked up that had these ley lines also had night marchers as well.
Yes.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it is incredible, and I could tell you a little bit about the night marchers if we have time.
Please.
This actually touches upon a whole area of research that both have been involved with for many years. But the very term NIMSA, which Walter understood through Charles Delshow and the Sonora Aero Club, it was the name of the corporation or the entity that was financing the club to build these airships back in the 19th century. And I looked into it and realized that there was something deeply esoteric in that name, and discovered that actually there's a word in ancient Egyptian that is very similar to Nimsa. It is Nimsa. It may have been pronounced Nimza. This is unclear, but I think it's the same thing. And what it's referring to is these disembodied entities or beings, and they marched. This was one of the characteristics of the Nimza. They marched, and they marched incessantly. You have to think of it as like a loop film. I think you probably have heard of ghost phenomena, like in one example is in some of these Civil War battlefields where people will see soldiers from the Civil War as ghosts, and they're doing the same thing over and over, like on a loop of film. Mm-hmm. Well, this is very similar to the Nimza, who apparently are somehow captured on the astral plane, and they are in a kind of sleepwalking state. And so their most striking characteristic is that they march. And these beings are kind of like amphibian type of beings. They're upright, they're bipedal, and this sounds very much like the ancient gods that are spoken of in some legends. The Nomo, that the African Dogon talk about. And these were the culture bearers of the ancient civilizations. So I think that these night marchers are a part of all that. They are some kind of beings who are entrained to the Hawaiian Islands specifically. And they may have lived there in the islands in thousands of years ago, but perhaps because of some kind of war or something, some conflict, they were banished into this astral plane, and they were shorn of their identities. If you think of, for example, DNA, DNA tells us who we are in many ways. It not only defines us physically, but mentally and spiritually. And these beings, I believe, were shorn of their karmic identities so that they could not reincarnate. And therefore, they were referred to as nameless. And actually, the word Nimza, that's exactly what it means. It means no name or nameless. Nim, the root nim is in all these Indo-European languages, going all the way back to ancient Egyptian, refers to name, or in ancient Egyptian, nim meant who. But you can see that the question who is very similar to, who are you? What's your name? That kind of thing. So these are beings that are sort of in a state of amnesia and in a sleepwalking state, and they're incessantly marching, but they're also trying to make contact with humanity mentally in order to revitalize themselves. So there's a huge story behind all of that, and I think the night marchers, which I've never heard of before until you just told me now, I think that they are connected to the Nimza, or they are among the Nimza.
Oh, that's incredible. The Hawaiian legend of the night marchers are that they walk in procession, and they are warriors that walk ahead of the chiefs and the kings, like King Kamehameha, and they warn people ahead of time. So you'll hear drummings and the sounds of the drums. They hear chanting, and this is a warning beforehand. So when you hear that, then you're supposed to bow down, and you're supposed to strip your clothes and bow down, and you're not supposed to look at them.
Yes. Well, this is all very, very interesting, and we can look at some of this, the bowing down and the stripping of the clothes. What's happening there is that these beings, these night marchers, they're actually feeding on the astral energy of human beings, and so they can acquire that astral energy more if the person removes their clothing. And also, walking ahead of the king in the battle, there is a relationship between humanity and these beings that I'll call Nimza. And as I said, the Nimza are acquiring some kind of form and consciousness through their association with humans. So they often attach themselves to war situations and manipulate those situations. And this is very consistent with the same things that have gone on over in Europe and other parts of the world, where there's these disembodied entities that are attached to warriors or a battle, and they're feeding off of that energy, particularly when there is a battle and people die on both sides. They feed off of that astral energy.
Wow, that's incredible. If ley lines amplify energy, could they affect human consciousness?
Could it affect human consciousness? Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll tell you, I'm reluctant to share some of my experiences because I found in the past, when I talk about this publicly, a lot of people just simply don't believe me. And unless you've had the experiences yourself, It sounds far-fetched,
Sure.
particularly if you're of a materialistic mode of thinking. You're into what I don't call it scientific thinking. It's scientism. It's a belief in the materialistic interpretation of reality. But I've had these experiences myself, so I know they're real. And you on ley lines, particularly ley lines that when you're at a node, and what I mean by node, a point on the Earth where more than one ley line is there, they intersect each other at that point. So it might be, say, 3 ley lines intersecting, or even more. That kind of place is a window area for all sorts of psychic phenomena. And it's quite possible if you were on that spot at the right time, several things might happen to you. You might have a vision of the past or the future, or you might receive information psychically. You might teleport to another place. All kinds of things could happen. It depends on the time and where it's at and what your attitude is when you're there and who you are. It's a very personal experience. And the ley lines, they're alive. There's consciousness in the ley lines, and it will communicate with a person, and it always does that on a very particular level. It's talking to you, and so what it says to you, it might not say to another person, and probably it would not say to another person. It would have another message for that other person.
Yeah, that's
so these are points of psychic phenomena without a doubt.
Wow, that's incredible. I know you had mentioned something about the Philadelphia experiment. During World War II, the United States military was said to have tested groundbreaking electromagnetic technology on a naval destroyer, an experiment that allegedly rendered the ship invisible and teleported it over 200 miles in just a matter of moments, known as the Philadelphia experiment. This event has fueled speculation about government experiments on teleportation, time travel, and the manipulation of space-time itself. Is the
Yes.
Philadelphia on or in a ley line as well? I believe it is.
Yes, it is. And in fact, this gets into what we were talking about in our contemporary world. We will find things like state capitol buildings, city halls, cathedrals.
Oh.
That goes way back to the Middle Ages,
Sure,
the
sure.
cathedrals. These structures are intentionally placed on ley lines for various esoteric reasons. So when we get to the Philadelphia experiment or several other advanced technology, weapons technology experiments that occurred in the 20th century and, by the way, still are occurring, when we get there to where we find the military-industrial complex doing these things, you will discover that they know all about ley lines. And so when you have a professor in a major university and he says, oh, the ley lines, that's just some kind of woozy new age nonsense, and let's not take that seriously. Well, that's the cover. But the truth is, the people at the top, the intellectuals, and particularly the scientists working in the military-industrial projects, they know all about the ley lines. They have the Earth mapped. They know more about it than I do, but I'll say I've learned a lot in my lifetime, enough to see what they're doing. And here's the case of the Philadelphia experiment. And a lot of people say, well, that never happened. That's just a legend. Well, sorry, it really did happen. And there's been a lot of research in these later years on the Philadelphia experiment, very well establishing that what was going on and when it happened. And, but it all started with Carlos Allende writing these letters to a UFO researcher by the name of Morris K. Jessup. and he claimed that the U.S. Navy was able to teleport a naval vessel from one point to another instantaneously, and also it could make that vessel invisible. Well, this really happened, and they do have this ability today. They have fantastic abilities. But the Philadelphia experiment proper, there was a whole bunch of experiments they were doing with these naval vessels. They called them the Philadelphia experiment, but there were two particular experiments. One was at sea, and then another one was at the Philadelphia Navy Yard. Now, the one at sea happened in World War II in 1943. The one that happened in the Philadelphia Navy Yard, as the best as I can determine, happened after the end of World War II. And this particular experiment, it was in the Philadelphia Naval Yard docks. The ship was actually docked, and it had already been through some very strange experiences, and they were continuing to use it. Now, there is a ley line. It runs across the eastern coast of the United States. It's a very powerful ley line, and it actually starts in Eastham, Massachusetts, and goes all the way in a giant curve along the east coast of the United States, all the way to the southern region of the United States, and it passes directly through the Philadelphia Navy Yard, right through where that dock was at, where they had the ship experiment. It also passes through, to give you an idea, it passes through the Statue of Liberty. And the Statue of Liberty was intentionally built on that line. So this line continues to the south of Philadelphia to the town of Newport News, Virginia. And that is where the ship teleported to. It literally moved along that ley line, probably instantaneously or at the speed of light or faster than the speed of light. And there's a whole controversy there. Can we travel faster than light? Well, yes, we can. And it may very well have traveled faster than light to Newport News, Virginia, where it re-entered our space-time. And during that period of time when it was transporting from one point to the other, it really was out of phase with this space-time universe. So it was passing through physical objects, trees, houses, who knows what, And then when it reached Newport News, Virginia, it constituted itself so that it was in resonance with our space-time, and therefore the effect was it reappeared visibly, and people on the docks at Newport News actually saw the ship just suddenly appear out of a green fog. And then it went back to the Philadelphia Navy Yard. All of this happened along a ley line, which is, what is a ley line? It's a gravity anomaly. And these gravity anomalies are created by stress in the crust of the Earth. As the continents move and shift over the surface of the Earth, they sustain stresses and like wrinkles, if you can imagine. And so you'll get low spots and high spots. And where the low spots are at, you get river courses developing, or you'll just get an aligned valley. And the high spots will be mountain ranges or ranges of hills. So you have to learn how to read the land and look at topographical maps and look at the patterns in the land. The land will tell you exactly where the ley lines fall. And this is one method that the people who have built all these amazing structures on Earth, they have used a topographical survey to find the stress lines, the ley lines. But in some cases, I think they're using psychic methodology to find these places. They're probably using a number of techniques to completely cite a particular construction. It depends on which culture is doing it and when, how they would go about doing that. But the ley lines are very important, and they have an effect on our daily lives. We're just unaware of it.
Wow. Could some of these ley lines be the reason why some of these locations like Sedona or Bermuda Triangle or Skinwalker Ranch seem to have a high concentration of supernatural events?
Well, I think so. Now, I will say I haven't, not in recent times, analyzed Sedona that much, although I have analyzed the state of Arizona in general in terms of ley lines. I have ley line maps of Arizona, pretty complex, and Sedona figures in that, but there are some other areas in Arizona that are just as fascinating or more fascinating than Sedona. Sedona has kind of, they've developed this tourist industry, and they've emphasized the New Age aspects of that. So it doesn't mean that there's nothing to Sedona, but I'm just saying maybe the effects of Sedona are a little more exaggerated in the press agentry of the people promoting that town. But there are some incredible places in Arizona, and Edgar Casey was quite fascinated with Arizona, and he went down there in the 1930s trying to find the Two-Eye Stone, and I believe he did locate it. That was the place where they got the crystal that, we hear so much about, the great crystal of Atlantis. This is where they mined it, was in Arizona, and it was on ley lines down there, and he was going on all these ley lines, and he was having all kinds of psychic experiences. It's a very long story, but that just illustrates that there's places in Arizona that are even more fantastic than Sedona.
Wow, I'd like to visit that because I went to Sedona and I found it, like you said, very touristy, and I didn't feel anything when I was there, to be honest.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but I didn't know if it's...
To be fair, I've never been to Sedona, and the reason, I haven't been all that interested in it because I have seen that I think some of the claims are a little exaggerated. I do know that people have had UFO sightings there, but UFOs are sighted everywhere all the time, and the particular reasons why somebody sees a UFO are so varied, and there's so much misidentification of ordinary things. It becomes a very complex subject matter to pin down the validity of UFO sighting. So that's a big problem there. And there are people who are having vision quests at Sedona and things like that. But this goes on in other places as well. I think the basic phenomenon is real. I've experienced it myself. I've had visions of the future, and I've had intuitions about the past. There is a very interesting place up in Wisconsin called Aztalan, and I went there some many years ago, and I had some definite impressions of that place. That place was hundreds of years ago. It was a culture center, and it was actually the source of the Aztec civilization. That civilization in Aztalan in Wisconsin, they had almost an apocalypse there, and the civilization fell apart. They warred with each other. It was a civil war, and they practically killed off most of the people there. And what was left, the remnant people, moved southward into Mexico, and they established the Aztec civilization. And this civilization was a remnant going way back of Atlantis. And there were people from Europe coming over here and trading with the people at Aztalan. They were trading for copper. This was a copper mining region. So there's a whole story there about Aztalan, but I went there. There's a lake there at Aztalan that has pyramids, small pyramids underwater. People have scuba dived and established that these pyramids are there. It was part of that civilization. And people have had psychic experiences up there, and I had an impression of this this civil war that went on and all these people being killed when I was there. And I didn't even know the story. It wasn't until afterwards, after I came back home and I started looking into Aztalan, I discovered that this was what had happened there. So the Earth can record events, particularly traumatic events.
Yeah.
And you can pick up on those if you have a little bit of psychic ability.
Wow. So, like places like the Great Pyramid and Machu Picchu, are they built on some kind of ley line? Or is it to the stars?
Well, yes. And the Great Pyramid is the granddaddy of all ley lines. All the major, what I call straight line gravity anomalies that circle the globe in a grid pattern, they all converge on the Great Pyramid. It's the center of all the ley lines. And that's why they built the Great Pyramid there, was for that very reason. The Great Pyramid's in a unique position on the surface of the Earth because if you look at it in terms of longitude, it's on a longitude that crosses more solid continental landmass than anywhere on Earth. That's the longest you can go in going down to Europe, and then you have the Mediterranean Sea, and then you have all the length of Africa all the way to its tip. This longitude, that's the longest of continuous landmass in the world, and that's why one reason why they built the Great Pyramid there. And so you have all of these other ley lines that are coming in, converging on that one spot. And I have my theory about what the Great Pyramid was all about. It's very complex, and there are other people who've had theories. You may be aware of Christopher Dunn, who wrote a book called The Giza Power Plant.
Mm-hmm.
Have you read his book?
No, but I've heard his theory, yes.
Yeah, so his theory is that it was an electrical power plant. That's one theory. Dr. Joseph P. Farrell has written many books on the Great Pyramid. His theory is that it was a weapon of mass destruction using scalar wave technology, which is something that Nikola Tesla experimented with. And I think there's a great deal of validity to Dr. Farrell's ideas, but where he and I part company is that I think there was a lot more to the Great Pyramid than it simply being a weapon. It was using this scalar technology, but in an alchemical way. And I have discussed that in the Handprint of Atlas. And all of that relates in a way to my theory about how the Earth's axis was shifted. And those people, or whoever did that, I believe non-humans did it, they were using the principles of geomorphology to determine the exact right spot to shift the Earth's axis. And it's actually the point of impact of this cosmic body that I believe impacted the Earth occurred due south of the Great Pyramid. It's on that same longitude that is the longest landmass on the planet. And they chose that in part because they didn't want to tear the planet apart when they hit it. They just wanted to shift its axis of rotation. So that was a very careful and precise planetary engineering that went on there.
That is so cool. I talked to two guys that talked about the electric universe. I believe you touched that a little bit about that in your book as well, about the pole shift, and basically, what is his name? Volkowski? No, I'm saying it wrong. Velikovsky.
Velikovsky,
Yes.
Yeah, I haven't visited his ideas in many a year, but I was years ago, half a lifetime ago, interested in Velikovsky. He made some startling claims. You know, he claimed that Venus, I believe it came out of Jupiter, just some thousands of years ago, very recently. I don't think that's correct, and I think most mainstream scientists would agree with me. But it's interesting, some of the predictions he made about Venus have now come true. When they sent probes up there, they found that many of the things he was saying about Venus was accurate. So I'm not one to dismiss Velikovsky whole cloth. I think he had some very interesting ideas, and I can't recall if he was saying that the Earth's axis of rotation was shifted, but I think he did discuss that.
Yeah.
And if I recall correctly, he may be the one that I quoted in the Handprint of Atlas about the Brahman star charts.
Mm-hmm.
Of something like 13,000 years ago or more, they date those.
Mm-hmm.
And those Brahman star charts of ancient India show that the constellations were in a different position from what they are now,
Yep.
suggesting that the Earth's axis has been shifted since they made those star charts. Well, I think that's correct. I think if you look at how those star configurations changed, it suggests the very kind of shift that I'm talking about, where the planet Earth was had an axis of rotation that was more toward the 90-degree angle with the plane of the ecliptic, which is that plane of the equator of the sun that all the planets revolve around. So before the Earth's axis was shifted, it was more like at a 90-degree angle, the axis, to the plane of the ecliptic. But when it was shifted, it kind of went over on its side. And that was very important, because why would they shift the Earth's axis? I believe what they wanted to do was to create 4 separate seasons: winter, spring, summer, and fall. You get that when you have a planet whose axis is at an angle to its sun. And so before the axis was shifted, we didn't have pronounced seasonal changes, and what that did was it made it really impossible to grow the kind of man-made agriculture that we have today. All the domesticated grains in particular, they need those 4 seasons in order to grow in abundance. So what were they doing, the people that shifted the axis? They wanted to make it possible to have agriculture on this planet on a wide scale so that it could support billions of people. They were preparing the Earth to be populated by billions of people, and that's where we are at today. After some 13,500 years later, we're approaching 8 billion people on this planet. And we're getting to a point, in my opinion, the planet is already overpopulated. So it doesn't have to be like in the science fiction movies where everybody's shoulder to shoulder and the guy's saying, oh, we're overpopulated. No, there's no place to stand. It's not quite like that. If you run out of potable water, you're overpopulated, and that's where we're getting to today, that we don't have enough fresh water for the planet. So something's in the offing here. I don't think it's too much of a good thing, but I do think that cosmic forces are, what people call God. I am a theist. I do believe in a God, a creator of this universe, and I think that we're being looked after on a very high level of intelligence. And in the long run, things are going to be okay, but we're headed through some great trials in this century, and I'm concerned about it, but we all have to do the best we can to live in the world that we've been born into, and so I intend to do the best I can with the way things are, and it's not going to stop me from telling people what I think are the way things are, because a lot of this is being kept from us. We're being given a sugar-coated version of reality. And I think people are capable of understanding these things and should understand them.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned, like, very briefly in your book about the moon and how when NASA went there and it had that ringing to it. And
Yes.
yeah, do you believe that the moon is artificially placed in orbit, and is it not a planet maybe?
I think it is. I think it's an artificial satellite.
Satellite, that's what I meant. Okay.
Yes, there are some people. I just heard a guy recently, debunking this idea, and he was talking about that ringing, that when they drop something on the moon, it would do this vibration, and it would just ring for hours, like it was hollow.
Yep.
And he said, the moon is so cold, that's the reason it's ringing like that. It's a body that's so cold, Well, there's some truth in what he was saying. If you've got a very, very cold body, it will reverberate. So it's not that I'm disagreeing with that fellow. Sorry, I don't remember his name right now, but I think, he had good intentions and he was telling what he knew. But I think there's more to it than that. The moon is hollow. Okay, there's a lot of other things besides the ringing to indicate that it's hollow. One of the things is that they found when they sent probes up to the moon to orbit it, that the trajectory of these probes would be distorted from their mathematical models. So what they realized was that the spacecraft was being pulled down toward the planet or the moon or whatever. It was being pulled down by a gravity anomaly. And they actually had a name for these gravity anomalies. They called them mass cons. That is, concentrations of mass, literally. So they called them mass cons. And there's a number of these mass cons that can be found on the surface of the moon. There are also hollows in the moon. And, the moon presents the same side of it to Earth all the time. It does not rotate. Yeah. It just, it keeps that same face to us. And the changes we see in the moon are just shadows and light created by the way the sun is related to the moon in terms of the Earth. The moon is not turning or anything. And the moon is not really round, it's egg-shaped. But you can't see that from the Earth because you're looking at the egg from the bottom end, if you can imagine, the fat end of the egg. That's what we're seeing. Okay. And it looks circular, in diameter, but it's actually in the back of it's kind of distorted a little bit. And that's because that front end of the moon that's facing us is heavier, it's denser. And the back end of the moon is less dense. And that's where people have said for decades that the most strange constructions can be found in the moon, and that NASA's covering that up, which I think is true. And that's where you enter into that hollow area back there. And I don't think it's just one hollow area. It's a number of voids in the moon. And these are living spaces for beings. So we have some beings who live up on the moon, and that is part of the picture of the UFO thing. And there are also other moons in the solar system that have these voids in them. Most particularly on Mars, you have two moons, Phobos and Deimos, and those are hollow. They have hollows in them. And gas has been observed coming out of the surface of Phobos. So there is atmosphere inside those voids. These are living spaces. Wow. Our whole solar system is a vast ruin of an ancient technological civilization that existed literally millions of years ago.
Wow.
And all kinds of things could have happened in those million years. You can imagine. They had wars, and they had the beginning of civilizations, and they had their height of their civilization, and then the civilization declines. All kinds of things has gone on in our solar system. And our solar system is continuing to be the home for all kinds of non-human intelligent life forms. They live in gigantic, you could call them motherships, gigantic cigar-shaped objects that orbit the rings of Saturn. And these have been photographed by NASA. So a lot is going on out there, but of course the powers that be, our official spokespeople, they deny all this, but it's getting out. There's a lot of researchers out there who are uncovering all these facts, and you just have to get out there and dig around, and you'll begin finding them for yourself.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about Mars too, because I think there have been some photos of things that look like building structures and things like that on Mars. And it looks like there was a war on Mars, so they say.
Well, yes. I mean, that has been discussed for decades, going back to the Viking mission,
really?
That photographed Mars in the late 70s, and that's when they discovered the face on Mars. It was actually NASA who released those photos of the face on Mars, and they were kind of taken aback by it. The whole story of the face on Mars is very complex, and, you know, there's a lot of controversy about it, but that whole region of Cydonia there, where the pyramids are at, and the face on Mars, I believe there's really something to that, and maybe not all the claims are true. Richard Hoagland wrote a book called The Monuments of Mars many years ago, and it's got a lot of interesting photographs, and I think there's a lot of truth in that book, but I also think that some of his claims at least should be held with some degree of skepticism, and particularly all the alignments he has shown on the planet there, with all the mathematical equations and everything. I'm not sure that is all valid, and he's been criticized quite a bit for all that. But even if that's so, even if his theories about these structures are not exactly right, the structures are there. Some of his ideas, I think, are brilliant. His theory about tetrahedral geometry in particular, which ties into my own theories about ley lines. And so it's a big subject, but these structures are there on Mars, and I just encourage.
Hey Ohana, I hope you're loving this conversation as much as I am. I just wanted to pause for a quick moment to ask for your support. If you're enjoying what you're hearing and feel like we've earned it, we'd be so grateful if you could leave us a rating or review. Your honest feedback really helps us grow and reach more people who love exploring these fascinating topics. And if you think this episode would resonate with someone you know, don't forget to share it with them. Mahalo nui loa for being part of our journey. Now, back to the show.
Your listeners, your viewers here, to just look into that stuff for yourself. You know, don't take NASA's word for it. Don't take any of officialdom's word for these things, because they have their own reasons for creating their mythologies, and you should go out and investigate these things for yourself. And also on the moon, too, you know, let's not forget that. And Hoagland also wrote a book called Dark Mission, with some very interesting photos in that of these towers that are miles high coming off the surface of the moon. And it looks like what was originally on the moon was a gigantic canopy of what was probably transparent aluminum, not glass, but aluminum. And today, scientists have started developing transparent aluminum, and I think that they had that in quantity on the moon, and they had this canopy over the moon where you could put atmosphere in there and have people living all in there.
Wow.
I think in the ancient times, if you looked up at the moon at night, you might not see a white image. You would see maybe a blue-green world that looked a lot like a miniature Earth, and it would just be, you'd be looking at it through a canopy of transparent aluminum.
Wow, like a firmament.
Quite incredible. It was permanent, yes.
No, I mean, like, I'm sorry. Firmament? F-I-R? Firmament? Like the Bible talks about the firmament? Yeah. Like that?
Oh, yes. You could look at it as an artificial firmament.
Ah, okay.
Yes, to hold in the atmosphere of the moon. Now, on Earth, this term firmament comes from the Old Testament, and it was the idea that before the Noachian flood, there was a firmament, above the earth in the sky. And what that was, it was a canopy of clouds that covered the whole earth. And when this cataclysm occurred, that is what I'm talking about, the shift in the Earth's axis occurred, it created such terrible atmospheric disturbances that it disrupted that cloud cover and caused everything to rain down upon the earth. And it also opened up deep recesses in our planet where water had been captured for eons down there in volcanic tubes, and that erupted up as fountains. And you hear about the fountains of the great deep broke open. Well, that was these huge fountains of water shooting up miles into the sky and then raining back down upon the earth. And all of that together caused the flood that, we get the legend now of Noah's flood. But this was something that really happened, and if it did not cover the whole earth, it had an effect upon the whole earth. And one of the pieces of evidence of this are the mammoths up around the North Pole, where they found these beasts with grass still in their mouth. They were they were flash frozen and killed instantly, and they're still up there to this day, and they find them every once in a while. So this really happened, and it made a cataclysm over the whole world. It buckled some of the tectonic plates, and that's why on the west coast of South America you have Tiahuanaco, which was a port city in its day when it was a living city, and now it's thousands of feet up in the air. Well, it was thrust suddenly up because the tectonic plate that South America set upon buckled up when the force of that object in Africa hitting the earth, it created a pressure wave that traveled all around the planet and changed the axis of the earth, and it just created all kind of cataclysm wherever that pressure wave passed, and it created tsunamis thousands of feet high that washed over the continents.
Wow.
So
that was the Lake Victoria? Yeah. Is that?
That's where the object hit. Yes, I'm absolutely convinced that this object came in very close at a tangential angle to the surface of the earth, and it struck at Lake Victoria, and it forced up 3 mountains to the west of Lake Victoria. Lake Victoria is a crater lake, so there was no lake there before the event. It created a huge crater there, which then later filled with water. It became a lake. But this is all in the Handprint of Atlas. And the 3 mountains to the west are symmetrically ranged out there. They're Mount Elgin, Mount Kilimanjaro, and Mount Kenya. And I believe it's Mount Kenya that is almost smack dab on the equator. And these other 3 mountains are symmetrically ranged out in relation to Lake Victoria. How did those mountains thrust up in that manner? Well, this object was not just a single spherical object. On the front of it, it had 3 smaller objects attached. Those objects were designed to break off when the impact occurred, and then they were thrust across the landscape laterally and landed miles away in the distance, and struck and pushed up these mountains. And the idea was to grip the Earth. So you can imagine it's like cannonballs shooting off from the central object in 3 different directions symmetrically, and it's just like a hand grabbing the Earth and pushing it in a new direction of rotation. And that direction of rotation is what is the equator today for us.
Wow.
It established a new north and south pole and a new equator.
Wow. Do you see a connection between ley lines on Earth and planetary alignments in the solar system?
Absolutely, but to find the ley lines on other planets would be a very difficult thing, but you get a little clue there with Cydonia on Mars. A lot has happened with Mars that obscures its original structure. One thing I can say about Mars is that it doesn't have any continents because it's completely covered with continental landmass. It doesn't have any basalt areas like Earth has. You know, we have continents, then we have the basalt, which is the floor of our oceans. Mm-hmm. 2 different kinds of material, 2 different geological structures. On Mars, it's all continent. And why is that? Because Mars is smaller than the Earth. And so the original volcano on Earth, from which all the continental landmass extruded, this exploded up, and it created a huge pancake of what was essentially rock on one side of Earth, very asymmetrical. And that asymmetry, when the Earth was rotating around, you can imagine it created tremendous centrifugal stresses on the surface of the Earth, and that is what caused the continents of the Earth to begin breaking apart to form separate continents. On Mars, what happened was the central volcano began extruding all the landmass, but there was nothing to slow down this process of the extrusion as it was on Earth. What slowed down the process on Earth was the moon. The moon was there, and it was creating a drag to slow down this process of the tectonic plates spreading apart. On Mars, it had 2 moons, but they were very small. They had no appreciable effect on the rate that this volcanic extrusion proceeded, and it just kept erupting and putting this mass out onto the surface of the planet until the whole planet was covered in solid land mass. So there was no place, it was all locked together. There was no place for any kind of tectonic plates to develop or to shift. And so it's never had any continental drift. And that makes a problem in trying to understand the underlying geomorphology of the gravitational structure of the planet, because the main way you can detect that structure is through the effects of continental drift. As the continents drift over the surface of the Earth, they create all kind of wrinkles and tension structures and things that tell you where these gravity anomaly lines are. And you can analyze that statistically or even visually and figure it out, which is what I did with Earth. But you can't do that with Mars. You have to use other methods, and those methods are far beyond me because they would involve some very, very sensitive gravimeters that you would have to take over the whole planet, maybe put those gravimeters in a spacecraft and have it fly around the planet and do a gravitational survey. Very sophisticated technology would be required to do that. I can't do it. And the same thing with the moon. The moon has had so much change occurring to it, and its structure is very, very strange. It would be difficult, other than what NASA has already done with mapping the mass cons, to figure out what its gravitational structure is. But I think that that structure is probably artificial. So, what the moon was, it was probably some kind of shell of very hard material. And then what they did, they came in and they dumped a bunch of aggregate of rocks and crushed up material. They just dumped it onto the surface of the moon. And the reason we can be pretty sure this is what happened is that the samples taken from the moon show that the rocks on the moon, some of them are extremely old, and some of them are millions or billions of years younger than other rocks that are right next to them. That doesn't make any sense unless that's just an artificial aggregate of material that's been crunched up and dumped. And that's exactly what I think it is.
Wow.
Yeah.
Have you heard of the Black Knight satellite?
I vaguely heard of it. What did you tell me about it? I don't know too much about it off the top of my head.
I don't know too much about it either, just that the Black Knight satellite they think is a surveyor or surveying Earth. And they said that this satellite has been out for a very long time, this Black Knight satellite, and no one knows where it came from. No one knows where it's from, who put it out there. And instead of going left to right, the satellite goes like North Pole to South Pole. So it.
Yes, I have heard of this. I don't know that I've connected the name Black Knight satellite to this object you're describing, but I have heard of the object, and they don't seem to talk about it anymore, as far as I can tell.
Just Billy Carson. Billy Carson is the only one who talks about it.
Billy Carson?
Yeah.
I have heard about it, and there have been actually several of these objects that's gotten into the public domain, knowledge of them. They actually come and go. Some of these, they'll be out there, and then you don't hear about them anymore. It's like, well, maybe they just moved them away. But this particular object, I think it's there. It's been there a long time, and I'm trying to remember. There was it might have been Robert Heinlein, the science fiction writer. He wrote a short story many decades ago called Rendezvous with Rama, and it was about something like this Black Knight satellite that was approaching Earth, and it was an oblong thing, and it was hollow, and astronauts fly out there to it to investigate it. And that's the story's kind of vague in my mind, but it was basically about something like that. And I tend to think that Heinlein and a lot of these science fiction writers had a pipeline to some secret knowledge, and there may have been something like that actually happened. The whole thing about the moon is quite a controversy, because there's the camp, particularly with NASA, that yes, we went to the moon in chemical rockets, and everything you saw about the Apollo program was on the up and up. I'm not in that camp. I don't believe the Apollo program was real. It was a hoax. It was a massive hoax, well-financed, and there's all kinds of indications of that. That would be a subject in and of itself for a podcast. But there have been people who have talked about this and done documentaries on it.
Yeah,
and
Bart
I've seen
Sobral.
these. Pardon?
Bart Sobral. I don't know if you've heard of him. He talked about it.
Art Bell?
No, Bart. His name is Bart, B-A-R-T, Bart Sobral.
Okay.
Yeah, he talks.
I don't think I have heard of him. But,
okay.
but I'm sure he's done something on
Yes.
it. It's out there. For many years, people have been saying this. And, of course, people who believe we went to the moon, they can be very dismissive and contemptuous of anybody who's saying we didn't go to the moon.
Right.
But, the thing is about so many of these, I'll call it a conventional paradigm type of thinking, that people are hypnotized to the conventional paradigm, and they think they're very rational and informed, and actually they're asleep, and they don't have the facts. And you have to look beyond the obvious to understand some of these things. But we didn't go to the moon in a chemical rocket. But I'm not one of those who would say we never went to the moon. And when I say we, I mean, of course,
Humans.
Collectively as the United States government did not go to the moon. I believe we've been going to the moon for a long time, at least the early 60s. But we weren't going in chemical rockets. We were going in electrogravitic craft. That's the only way you can get there safely and back. And they knew that, but look, they didn't want to reveal the fact that we had electrogravity, because it would just overturn our whole Earth civilization. We're based on oil consumption.
Yeah.
Our economies are based on oil consumption. And if you let the technology of electrogravity out into the public domain, it would just change everything, and in a way that our world leaders do not want it to change. So they kept that technology a secret, and sometimes at great cost to the people who are involved with it. There's the whole story of T. Townsend Brown. I think you probably know something about him. And, he was one of the main people who were developing this technology. And it's a very real technology. And I believe that's what they used to go to the moon. And so a lot of the information we've got about the moon came from this secret space program that they went out there and gathered up all the stuff and looked at everything. But then they bring it back to Earth, and then they say, oh, that's what the astronauts in the Apollo program did. They brought it here. But no, that's just not true.
Yeah, you wrote a book, Wonder of the Worlds, and you kind of touched upon that with Tesla.
Oh, yes.
Right?
And I'm very excited about my Tesla trilogy. Wonder of the Worlds is the first novel in the Tesla trilogy. It's followed by Metamorphosis and The Lost Pleiad. And all of these novels are about Nikola Tesla. Very exciting. It follows his whole life, basically, but in a fictional way. But a lot of the stuff in my trilogy, it's not really science fiction. It's fantastic science. It's technology that has been suppressed from public awareness. And I've had people who have reviewed my books, particularly Wonder of the Worlds, where I get into the technology that Tesla was using. And these are people who themselves today are trying to replicate what Tesla had been doing. And they say that I got the technology right in Wonder of the Worlds. This is, it's a very detailed, realistic book. You think, well, science fiction, a story of Nikola Tesla and Mark Twain going to Mars to battle Martians. What could be more outlandish than that? That's got to be an Edgar Rice Burroughs fantasy. But when you really get into reading it, you find that it's a very concrete historical story. It's based on things that actually happened in the lives of Nikola Tesla and Mark Twain and some of these other historical characters. After I wrote Wonder of the Worlds, I was contacted by the author, Sean Castile. He had written a book some years earlier, before Wonder of the Worlds came out, called Are We There Yet? ? And it was all about a secret space program that was begun by Nikola Tesla back in the early part of the 20th century. It sounded just like my novel, and I had a conversation with him, and I learned some things, and it was kind of mind-blowing. But apparently, there was a secret file at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base about Tesla building an airship, and they didn't know whether he went to Mars in it or what happened to it, but it was definitely some kind of project that Tesla had done and completed to some extent. And it also seemed that the Sonora Aero Club out here in California may have been involved with that project in some way. So that dovetails into the whole subject of the airships of the 19th century. But it makes the story of Wonder of the Worlds quite plausible that something like this just might have happened.
That's incredible. Yeah, because I didn't read your book, Wonder of the Worlds, but I believe you kind of build on the lot of facts and the nonfiction parts of, like you said, Tesla's life and how he discovered the electricity, the electromagnetic fields. Is that?
Yes. Tesla invented our alternating current system of electricity. That is what makes our modern world possible. We just simply would be back in the horse and buggy days still if he had not invented that system. And he invented it whole cloth, the whole system, the generation part of the machinery, the transportation part of the system, right down to how it goes into your house, the transformers, everything. He invented all of that, and it was a whole bunch of patents he filed back in the 1880s for this system. And he managed to get George Westinghouse to market it for him. They were going to be the most richest men in the world, but J.P. Morgan didn't want that. His cartel of bankers, they wanted the power of the alternating current system, and Westinghouse owed J.P. Morgan some money. And so J.P. Morgan went to Westinghouse and said, I'm going to call in all your loans if you don't turn over the patents, Tesla's patents, to me. And so Westinghouse had to go to Tesla and said, look, I'm up against the wall. If I don't turn the patents over to Morgan, I'm going to be wiped out. It'll be the end of the Westinghouse company. And Tesla said to him, I want this alternating current system to be used by the world. So I'm going to give you my patents, and you do with them as you see fit. And so then Westinghouse turned the patents over to Morgan. And, of course, Morgan was the same guy that was financing Thomas Edison. Mm-hmm. So what happened was the alternating current system became part of the General Electric and all that, and it was integrated with Thomas Edison's direct current. So now you have AC and DC, right? Mm-hmm. So DC was Edison's system, which was not an effective electrical system because you did have electricity. They generated it at a central plant, and then that electricity had to be transmitted over wires. But the problem was it could only be transmitted about a mile, and then it lost all significant power. So you had to build another plant a mile away and to generate the electricity and send it on further. Well, you could see that's not practical. That's not going to ever be the basis of an electrical society. It's just too costly. They couldn't run the DC system at a profit on a large scale. So it was really just a kind of a toy or a proof of concept of how electricity could be used if you could transport it. Tesla's system didn't lose any power over distances. You could string up a high-power tension line, as we see them everywhere today, even in Hawaii, I'm sure.
Yes.
And you could string those things up for thousands of miles and run electricity over it, and that's exactly what happens here in California. We have a system where electricity comes from California, and it can be sent all the way up to Canada on these electrical wires but they're using alternating current. It doesn't lose its power as it travels over the wire. This is what Tesla discovered and created a workable system that was commercial, and he had to hand it over to Morgan. So that tells you just a little bit about how things stand with the people who are running the world. They want that power for themselves. They have their own plans, and they're going to let us have a little bit of benefit of that power, but they're keeping the control of it at all times.
Yeah.
So obviously, if you had anti-gravity, that's going to have to be controlled in some manner, under their control.
Did you ever figure out how Tesla discovered this technology?
Well, there was a lot of literature. I'd say it was back in the 1950s, early 60s, all kinds of little pamphlets and things. People were claiming that Tesla was a Venusian, that he was from outer space and all kind of stuff like that. And, of course, people discounted all that. But Nikola Tesla was a very strange individual, and he had some extremely bizarre powers of perception. He and his brother. He had a brother named Dane. Dane was thrown from a horse when he was a young man and was killed in this accident. And so he didn't go on to live. Tesla went on and did all these amazing things. But both of these boys, in growing up, had this strange ability to see things in 3 dimensions. One example is, let's say someone said the word horse. Tesla would see a horse right before him. It would be a particular horse. It would be a horse that he had seen at some point in the past. And it was like an extremely precise and clear and vivid memory of that horse. But it would appear to him like a physical object. It would actually block his view of whatever was behind it. It was a solid object to Tesla, a very strange phenomenon. And that persisted throughout, his growing up. But he found that when he was in the university, he was able to visualize electrical machines in 3 dimensions. And this really accelerated his development in the alternating current field. He went to work for the telephone company in Budapest, Hungary, and that's where he basically was intensely working on the alternating current system. But he had a nervous breakdown. He worked so hard on it. He was working on the alternating current in the evening. He was working at the telephone company during the day, and he just wasn't sleeping at all. And he literally had a nervous breakdown and a collapse and was put to bed. And then when he awoke, he had the strangest experiences of feeling all these things like he'd be in a room where there was a ticking watch in the next room. He could hear the watch ticking. He could hear a fly land on a table in the other room. He could hear the fly land, imagine, like a thump.
Wow.
And he could hear a train 20 miles away blowing its whistle and rumbling over the train tracks, and it would send vibrations through the floor to him, and it would cause great pains in his body. And and he'd hear rumblings and roaring all the time. It was coming from objects off in the distance. He was picking all this up and magnifying it in his perceptions, and it was literally driving him mad. And it was a terrible time for him, but he managed to get over it. And one day, while he's walking in a park in Budapest with a friend of his, he has a vision of an alternating current motor. It's floating directly in front of him like a holographic image. He can see through it. He can see how it operates. And the sun that's setting off on the horizon, its rays are actually shining through this object. He can walk around the object and watch it work and move. And he says to his friend, "Watch me reverse it." his friend didn't know what he was talking about because he saw nothing. He just saw the sun over there. He thought he's talking about reversing the sun, but he wasn't. He was talking about this object that just through his mental power alone, he could cause that motor to reverse its motions. And that was the moment when he fully understood not only alternating current, but the energies of the universe. He understood it in an intuitive way that was almost like a religious vision. The question is, how could Tesla do this? Now, I'm of the opinion that Tesla actually had been contacted by some kind of non-human intelligence and perhaps manipulated, maybe at birth or after birth, to have these strange abilities of perception. Somebody wanted planet Earth to accelerate its technology exponentially, and I believe it was a non-human intelligence that was behind this, and they were literally working through Tesla. And I believe that J.P. Morgan, through his contacts, the people that were above him in the pecking order, they knew about Tesla. They knew what he was doing, and they wanted that power, and they got it. But then after Morgan got the alternating current system, Tesla abandoned alternating current. He had invented that. That was fine. But he was an inventor, not a technologist. And he went on to develop longitudinal electricity, something, we don't even hear about today, we don't know about. But he had discovered longitudinal electricity. It has the same geometry as a sound wave. And this was when he began developing his Wardenclyffe Tower on New Jersey. This was a technology that would be able to transmit television, radio, any kind of intelligence from a central point, and it had all other kinds of abilities. It could transmit electricity, power across vast distances. And this is the very thing that in 1903, Tesla went to J.P. Morgan and said, I want you to finance this project. And he gave him documents about it. And after Morgan and his advisors looked at the material, they decided that Tesla's project had to be shut down because it was just too powerful and it would change the world in too many ways. And so he refused to fund Tesla's development of this technology, and that was the end of that. And everybody thought that Tesla had just kind of lost his mind and went off into obscurity. Nothing could be further from the truth. What he did was go black. In other words, he was financed to continue developing his technology by J.P. Morgan and others, and he did this secretly, and he did it the rest of his life. And that is what my Tesla trilogy of novels is all about. It presents a kind of fictionalized version of what I think might have occurred, something like this, where this fantastic technology of electrogravity and teleportation, as in the Philadelphia experiment, that was all Tesla technology.
Wow.
In fact, he worked on the Philadelphia experiment.
Wow.
That was his project,
Wow.
and it's in my novels. And all of that was going on. And right on up to today, and they're talking about going to Mars. Well, they're going to do the same thing with Mars that they did with the moon. They'll have a public project with chemical rockets to go to the moon that will be fake, and they will then channel all the information they've already gotten about Mars from their electrogravity space program. They will then begin to say, here's this and here's that, and we got it on this Mars mission when we went to Mars in chemical rockets. That's the way the scenario will go. So this is what my Tesla trilogy is all about, and I'm very excited about it because we brought it out in hardback, and all three novels are now illustrated with my illustrations of the story the way I wanted it to be done originally. I just illustrated Wonder of the Worlds, but the other 2 novels were not illustrated, and now all 3 novels are illustrated, and I think people will really enjoy these novels. They're very entertaining, and already they're beginning to sell. Looks very good. The word's getting out, and you know, you can get these novels through Amazon or BarnesandNoble.com. You can order them, and they're print on demand, so they'll come out, you know, as soon as you order them, just a few days, you'll get your novels.
Wow, that's amazing. And this has been an absolutely mind-expanding conversation. And I know the listeners will really love to dive deeper into your work. I enjoy your books.
Yes.
So
yes, I hope they do, and I just encourage everybody to take a look at the Handprint of Atlas, because there's so much information in that. I know the people who have read it, they have had some great experiences learning about ley lines and going out and doing their own research. And that's what I want to stimulate people to do, is to go out to where you live and learn the land you've lived upon, been born upon. You'll see it in a whole new way.
Absolutely. I agree. Where can people find you and follow your research and maybe get their hands on your book? I know you mentioned Amazon, but where can they find you?
Well, Walter Bosley, who is my publisher at Lost Continent Library, they're setting up a website for me there, and I think they're in the process of doing that. And so I could be contacted there, any ideas people have. And I do podcast with Walter on occasion, so you want to keep an eye out at the Walter Bosley channel for my podcast. I just did one recently with him. So just take a look at Walter Bosley or the Walter Bosley channel to find out more about what I'm up to. Okay. And what I'm up to, I'm writing full time now. Wow. This is a very creative period of my life. I have several big projects going, and the next couple of years is going to be very exciting. So just keep an eye out, and you'll see some new things coming from me, and also for me working with Walter Bosley.
Nice. That's going to be amazing. Well, Sesh, I want to say a huge thank you again for coming back onto the show and diving even deeper into these fascinating mysteries with me. Your insights with the ley line and planetary energy grids and ancient engineering, all of this has been fascinating. And thank you again so much.
Well, thank you, Miya. It's been a pleasure to talk with you.
And that brings us to an end of another episode. I want to thank my special guest, Sesh Heri, for coming on again and sharing his incredible insights into ley lines, Tesla, and the Philadelphia experiment. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please be sure to follow, subscribe, and leave a positive review. It helps others to discover the show. And don't forget to share this episode with your friends. Remember to visit sensiblehippie.com and stay tuned for the launch of my brand new website soon. Until the next time, guys, take care, stay curious, and stay sensible. Bye.